Taken to the podium in his conference room in Madison, where he and a team of others are about to unveil their spending plan for a new Milwaukee Bucks arena.
County Executive Chris Abley and the mayor of the great city of Milwaukee, Tom Barrett, who are going to talk about how we brought this all together. This is a great partnership between public and private, the state and local government coming together. As I point out here, and I've said this morning, it's important to remember that what we're talking about is it's cheaper to keep them. And by that, what I mean is, if you look here on this chart, if the price of saying no is at least $419 million. So if the state does nothing in regards to an arena in the city of Milwaukee, the price of no has a cost, and we believe it's at least $419 million. That's if you add together the cost that we currently have, or the impact today of revenues collected on income by NBA players that we currently have, which is roughly $130 million. If you look at over the next 20 years, the impact of revenues we believe that will be collected as contracts go up, and those are very fiscally conservative estimates we've looked at in the past. We talked about our original plan, the projection of how many more revenues would come in over the next 20 years. And then you add to that the impact of the cost to the state, because, of course, as part of the original Bradley Center, there are conditions that would have that facility revert onto the cost of the state. Just adding that cost just alone over the next 10 years. So it's 20 years, the lifetime of what we're talking about, the arena deal for income taxes currently collected. It's 20 years for the impact in terms of the next 20 years for revenues that we collected from income taxes as part of the growth. And then just the next 10 years cost for the Bradley Center. Those costs alone get us at least $419 million. Now, obviously, it can be more than that. If you project it out a full 20 years for the cost of the BMO Harris Bradley Center, it becomes far greater than that, probably exceeding nearly $500 million. But just in those very conservative estimates, it's $419 million is the cost of doing nothing. Not a very good alternative. Versus right now, what we're talking about with a new arena plan, just for the state alone, the impact would be capped out at $80 million. This shows you how the arena funding is broken up. Half of it comes from the private sector, thanks in particular to not only the current ownership group, but the former owner, United States Senator Herb Kohl, for putting up, I think, a fabulous amount of resources to help in terms of putting up half of the cost of the $500 million to build a new arena. If you look around the country, the research we found is that typically it ranges about 65% public investment versus the rest coming from other sources. In this case, it is a true partnership, 50% from the private sector, the other 50% from the public sector. About 11% comes from the state of Wisconsin. 39% comes from a collaboration of a variety of sources at the local level. Then if you look at that in terms of an investment, for overall revenues, just for the state revenues that we get from existing as well as projected new state income tax revenues, it's a 3-to-1. What I mean by that is for every dollar the state invests, it is $3 in return of revenue when you add both the existing base and the new base. If you just look at new revenue, it's 2-to-1. So it's taking the base of what we get from every time the NBA plays a game in the state of Wisconsin, the revenue we collect, the just new revenue that will come in the future is 2-to-1. It's 3-to-1 when you already add the base out there, which is what I'll point to in the last chart here. And that is, you look at the impact of, right now the red here is what the state currently collects if we were continuing to collect that, and if that continued out at a flat rate. That's the base of what we collect from income taxes from players that play NBA games here in the state of Wisconsin. The gray here over a 20-year period is the cap, the investment the state of Wisconsin will make. That's $80 million. That's what is capped. So you can see the ratio. It's about half of what we currently collect. And then you look at the growth, the very fiscally conservative estimates that are projected out. We looked at and examined here in our administration. We worked the city and the county on as well. This is where the growth comes in the future, and again, you can see, particularly in that 20-year window, why that's so significant. So I think those very vividly, you know, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. I think that's incredibly important because, again, the price of doing nothing is not zero. It's $419 million. The state's commitment is capped at $80 million. The overall public commitment is capped at $250 million. That means if costs exceed the $500 million that are estimated for this project, the public's commitment is capped at that $250 million. The rest would have to be picked up by the Bucks and their partners in the private sector. I think that's incredibly important. There's also provisions to protect the taxpayers that if for some reason the Bucks were to be sold, again, which we can anticipate when you're going to get this great new arena, it's going to be a catalyst in downtown Milwaukee for both the city and the county and the region. But if for some reason they were to sell the team, again, we put in very comprehensive provisions that allow a clawback so that if a purchase of the team is made, the provisions of that would allow first draw to be taken. Those dollars out of the proceeds of the sale would go back to all the partners in the public sector to make sure the public was reimbursed for the monies that are owed and the monies that were spent before the new owners or before the owners would receive proceeds from that. So again, on every measure you look at this, this is one where it truly protects the taxpayers. From day one, when we made our announcement in Milwaukee about the original plan, we've been pleased to work with legislative leadership, with the mayor and his office and his team in the city of Milwaukee, with the county executive, and with officials from the Wisconsin Center District Board. It's really been important to make sure that we put a plan together where there was buy-in not only from state lawmakers who are going to be asked to pass this authorizing legislation, but that in addition to the state's commitment, that the city and the county made meaningful commitments to this project and did so in a way that not only protects state taxpayers, but as the county executive and the mayor will talk about, protects taxpayers at the local level. I think when you look at this, capping off the commitment at each level is incredibly important. For us, there's a huge benefit that the mayor and county executive can talk about in terms of the economic benefit for development and the presence of a professional team in Milwaukee. But all along, what I've tried to focus in on is something that's not only important to Milwaukee, which is important to me. That's an important part of the state's economy. It's an important part of the state overall, but also something that I could say to lawmakers, whether they were in Rice Lake or Rhinelander or Marinette or Sheboygan or anywhere else across the state, that this is a good deal for lawmakers anywhere in the state, Republican and Democrat alike. The fact is, if we do nothing, that revenue goes away. We have a huge hole. We have a cost to the state of $419 million. And what our hope was, we could find a way to make an investment that had a greater return than the investment we put in. And so with that, I'll come back and kind of summarize things and talk a little bit more about the plan. But I want to ask both the county executive and the mayor. First, ask Chris Abley, the county executive of Milwaukee County, to come up and talk a little bit about the county's commitment, and then the mayor of Milwaukee, and then I'll talk about the Center District Board, and then at the end, I should just say we'll then take questions. Since we've got a wide array of partners here together at the state and local level talking about this project, I know you all often have questions in the press about other topics. I'm going to ask today that you limit them to this project and not to other issues. We'll certainly talk about those issues on other days and other formats, but I think it's important for us, for everybody here, to have a chance to talk about this project. So with that, County Executive Abley.
Well, thank you, Governor, and thank you, Senator Fitzgerald, Speaker Voss, everybody from Budget, Capital, DOR, and an enormous amount of staff who have spent a ton of time making a great deal and structure better and better and better. And I want to echo a few things that the Governor has said. There's nobody standing up here who doesn't take profoundly seriously our stewardship responsibility of your tax dollars. Every day I make decisions, we all do, and we know it's not our money, it's your money. And you don't have to take my word for that. In 4 years, I've never proposed a budget that raised taxes. I've paid down debt and I paid down liability. I'm not looking for opportunities to spend more money than I have to ever. I also, however, run a venture fund, and I know a little bit about real estate development. And all of you know the Park East is land in Milwaukee that has sat empty for almost 2 decades. I don't think there's anybody who's unclear. If there was a lot of fantastic opportunities that we had for giant development in the Park East, there is nobody, and I mean nobody, who wouldn't leap at the opportunity to take them. So when you hear people talk about this deal as once in a generation, it's more than that. I've said many times, it's not just about the bucks, it's about taxpayers. As the governor pointed out, there's option A, the bucks leave, and the net loss, and it's not just city and county, it's primarily to the state, is enormous. There's option B, where we say yes to $250 million on the table, private money before there's any public investment, and a very clear return. And the clear return is more than what just the governor talked about. It's more than that. It's thousands of jobs. It's augmenting something that the city has done an extraordinary job with over the past few years, and that is development of new housing very close to the Park East. For those of you who are familiar with this area of downtown, just north of the Park East, one of many things the city has had great success in is developing a lot of residential units just north. And by a lot, I don't mean 100, I don't mean 1,000, I mean well over 1,000. Right now, when people who live in those units drive downtown, they come off of Commerce Avenue South, and then soon enough they encounter the barren open wasteland that is the Park East. The nanosecond that we announce, it isn't going to be a wasteland, it's going to be some of the most attractive development in the city that they have seen in years. The property values of those units go up a little bit, and you take 1,000+ units, you bump on property tax assessment by 5%, nobody's taxes go up a dime, but revenue over 20 years goes up a lot, and that means more social services, and it means more transit, and it means more of government's ability to do what we do. I take, as I said, we all do very seriously our responsibility to make smart, disciplined decisions. We have an opportunity here, an extraordinary opportunity, and I know there's a lot of people who may be hesitant to think, hey, you know, this seems like a big public investment, I want to make sure to kick the tires. Well, you should. You're not wrong, you're right. You are right. You should kick the tires, but here's what you should be thinking about. The potential upside is larger than we have had for downtown in terms of economic development ever. And yes, people should worry about being clear and enforcing and ensuring and continuing to work that we get every dime of return we can out of this investment, but they should also be thinking, what's the message to the rest of the country that we'll be saying when we say if we can't make $250 million in private money, an extraordinary opportunity put forward by people who have enormous amounts of successful experience in development, if we can't get this right, what's the message we're saying to developers outside the state when we want to keep this state a hotbed for business and that we're easy to work with? We should be worried about that too. I'm not second. I won't be backseat to anybody on the seriousness with which I take your tax dollars, but I also won't be backseat to anybody on just how seriously I take economic development. And so I'm incredibly excited about this idea. I wouldn't support it if I didn't have certainty this will work. And it should be made clear, everybody up here, this isn't the end point, getting a deal done. It's a beginning point. We're not saying fire and forget. We're still going to be in office, and we're going to make sure we continue to do everything we do once this deal gets started to ensure you do get the best value. But this is an exciting day, and it's been incredible to work with a bipartisan group who sees value in advancing the city, the county, and the state of Wisconsin. And I'll turn it to my friend, Mayor Tom Barrett.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I think we all would acknowledge that this is a little more challenging than designating a new state symbol. There's been a lot of give and take and back and forth. And I think all of us have focused on representing the people who elect us, whether it's at the state level or the county level or the city level. What we've tried to do is focus on our taxpayers. And what I said at the outset here is I wanted to have the Bucks stay here. I wanted to have a new arena, and I still want the Bucks to stay here, and I still want to have a new arena. I also have an obligation, as do all the other elected officials, to the people who elected me. And that's why I said that I was going to support a plan that would ensure that there would be no increase to the property taxpayers in the city of Milwaukee. And we have accomplished that goal. Because what we are doing in essence here, from the local level, so I want to speak from the local level, from the city level, is really very similar to what the city of Milwaukee did when the Bradley Center was originally built. When the Bradley Center was originally built, the city of Milwaukee, even though that was a gift, the building itself was a gift, there were a lot of costs that went along with that. There were a lot of ancillary costs, construction costs, utility costs. There were rights of way that had to be dealt with. And what we're doing here is we're doing something very similar to that. So the dollar amount that we are investing as a city is very, very close to what we invested when the city of Milwaukee invested when the Bradley Center was constructed. That to me is a fair deal. It's also a fair deal, I think, when you see what the state is receiving here. The state, in terms of revenue, as the governor indicated, benefits immensely by having the Bucks stay here. The state of Wisconsin benefits greatly by having the Bucks stay here. All you have to do is look at the income taxes that are generated by the players to understand how important this is. If there's any takeaway that any of you should have in this entire debate is if you have a child who's good enough to play basketball in the NBA, have them play in the NBA. Because what is happening now, and in particular because of the new television contract, is that the state is going to receive more revenue, again, as was shown on the charts. That's a good thing for the taxpayers throughout the state of Wisconsin. But what I'm focusing on, of course, is the local level. And I think what we have here is something that I can take to my taxpayers and say, look, we have to make sure that this gets done. And we have to make sure that this gets done in a way that's fair to you. And what we have done up to this point, and obviously there are more steps along the way, is presented a package that I think is responsible to the taxpayers of this state. And when you look at the revenue, for example, and the governor will talk about the Wisconsin Convention District, a lot of that revenue comes from people who come from outside. There's visitors who pay a lot of that revenue, and that's something that I think we should all recognize as well. So we know there's more work to be done. There's more work to be done at the state level. There's more work to be done at the local level. And while we're doing this work here in the Capitol, I'm working on a parallel track at the local level. I've been briefing my members of the Common Council so that there's been a good back and forth between the elected officials so that they know what's going on, so that they're not being blindsided, so that we can move this through the Common Council of the City of Milwaukee as well. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mayor Barrett. Thank you, County Executive Abley. We appreciate really the great partnership the city and the county had, and again, the great leadership of the legislature, particularly Speaker Robin Voss and Senator Scott Fitzgerald, who've personally been involved and engaged in this entire process, and we appreciate that. As was mentioned, the state's got a commitment. We're looking at a $4 million commitment a year, capped off at $80 million over the 20 years. As we point out in the chart, that's still far less than the revenue we get even in the base, let alone that we'd experience as things grew. So that's a pretty good return on investment. You add to that the city and the county, the benefit they get, the county putting in $4 million a year and seeing the benefit of the Park East development and the benefit overall, the city making its investments that will come out of the TIF and protecting property taxpayers. And then the Wisconsin Center District, which currently today's primary function is overseeing the entities that are part of the convention center with the Wisconsin Center District Authority itself, will now be elevated to overseeing not only the convention center but this new arena. And so that it's clear as part of the local investment, to make this match, revenues that are currently collected or are able to be collected by the Wisconsin Center District would be right now, which are designated for paying off the bonds. It's been around for about 2 decades, back from the mid-1990s when the authorization was given to go ahead and build that new convention center. Those revenues that currently come in, as the mayor said, largely from people from out of town that come in to pay off the bonds on that convention center. Now the only thing in this plan that will specifically change in terms of a legal authorization will be to continue to use those funds after the bonds have been paid off on the convention center to apply those same revenues that are currently being collected or authorized by the Wisconsin Center District Board to use those for a new arena. It makes sense. The convention center draws people into the region, into the county, particularly into downtown Milwaukee. Obviously, a new arena would be a catalyst for that. And it would apply the same thing. So it's important to remember, because a lot of you were around, I certainly was around, some of us up here were around, when we had in this Capitol bills to authorize what is today Miller Park and legislation to authorize the expansion of Lambeau Field. I want to be clear, both of those obviously were catalyst projects, but this project is different. In the case of Miller Park, state law was changed to authorize a new tax 0.1% sales tax in 5 counties in southeastern Wisconsin. That was a new tax to generate the funding that was needed to create what's now Miller Park. In the case of Lambeau Field, the expansion that was done there and the renovation was done at Lambeau Field authorized Brown County to enact a new sales tax within that county. That was a new tax. In this case, there is no new tax. This merely authorizes, and the legal language that would be included in this going forward, authorizes the revenues that are currently legally offered to the Wisconsin Center District Board to pay off the bonding on not only the construction but the maintenance of that convention center in downtown Milwaukee will now be able to use going forward to pay for a portion of the local share. The local share is part of this overall package, city, county, state, and Wisconsin Center District, to put forward our match of $250 million to match the private investment and to say that's capped. No more. We're not putting in any more than $250 million total. The state's capped off at $80 million. I think it's one of those things where it's a great opportunity to protect the taxpayers. We put in place all the provisions of protection to make sure that taxpayers at the state, at the city, at the county level are protected. And as we said at the onset, doing nothing has a cost. The cost is at least $419 million. As we looked at all the choices, as we looked at all the options, it became clear, as those of us here and others who work so diligently with us on behalf of our jurisdictions recognized, doing nothing was not a good option. Doing nothing left a big hole in the state budget, left a big hole potentially economically in the city and the county and the region. This is a way where we have a win for taxpayers that puts more money back into the hands of the state's taxpayers to pay in the future for schools and investments and all sorts of other things, as opposed to creating a $419 million hole going forward. So we're pleased to be here today to make this announcement. And with that, like I said, we'll take questions on this topic. I'm sure you have plenty of them. Kent?
Governor, you said there are a couple of hurdles you acknowledged in the legislature. How do you play?
Well, if either want to chime in, but I've talked enough about this. I feel like I got a good sense for what's going on. You know, I think there's going to be some debate about in the budget or not. I think a lot of that's based upon people not knowing all the facts that are in there. You got a lot of moving pieces. You had a lot of different government entities coming together, and so it was important for us to spend that time of confidence between the city, the county, and the state working together. But I hope more of the people look not just at the plan, but look at, I mean, if you just look at strict numbers and you say, if we do nothing, here's the hole it creates, versus the investment that the state's willing to make, as well as the partnership, not only from the city and the county and the center district, but particularly from the private sector. I think increasingly people, I hope, will look around this state, whether they're in southeastern Wisconsin or clear on the other side of the state. I hope lawmakers will see it's not just a good deal, it's a really bad deal if we don't do anything. And so I think it's going to take some time. It's certainly going to take some discussions. But I'm committed to working with the members of the legislature, for that matter, in any political party that's interested in this, because I think it's in our best interest long term. For all of us who take an oath, part of that oath means we're looking out for the fiduciary responsibilities of the people we represent here in the state of Wisconsin. And if we do nothing, I think we're turning a blind eye towards that oath.
I met with every Republican senator over the last 3 days. It was more a conversation of what does the plan look like? Is it in the budget, out of the budget? Could we do a separate amendment to the budget, which is another concept that's being discussed, but I don't really have a handle yet on kind of where the support is, and I think that'll take a while. We'll have to talk about it, and now that it's kind of out on the street, I think people get a feel for kind of what they can support and what they have concerns about. So, it's difficult to gauge right now, but we'll keep talking to people. I've also talked to Senator Schilling and a couple of members of the Democrat caucus who have approached me or said, what's going on with the Bucks arena deal, and certainly want to hear kind of their take on it as well. So that's kind of where we're at, I think, on members of the Senate at least. So yeah.
If this gets removed from the state budget, what would be the steps that would have to be taken to get this deal?
Well, the one concept is that it would be a separate amendment to the entire state budget, and if it would be voted up or down, included or not included, and then obviously it would make its way through the process. So it's a way that would accommodate some of the legislators that have concerns about having a bipartisan vote or having it included as part of the state budget. It's one way of handling that. I'm not saying everyone's on board with that. I'm not saying anybody's ruled that out. It's just kind of the concept that's been discussed so far. So, Robin, do you want to comment on that?
We have caucused on this topic numerous times. Each time we have caucused, we have been pretty clear in our message, and that's why we wanted to make sure on behalf of the state, which is what, of course, Senator Fitzgerald and I and the governor were negotiating for, to make sure that we had a good partnership. Our caucus has had that discussion. We have not talked in depth about having it inside or outside the budget. I think that's kind of insider baseball. What I'd like to focus on and what our caucus has been talking about is the benefits of having this deal go forward, a negotiated deal where every party had the opportunity to protect their own interests. Taxpayers, I think, are getting a much better deal than people were led to believe prior to today. If you look at the facts, it is obvious that it is better for Wisconsin to have the bucks stay here and maintain the revenue than letting them leave. I think part of our job today and the job of the citizens of the state is to listen to the facts, judge for themselves, contact their legislators, and let them know what they think. So part of this process is also to make sure that the public is fully engaged so they have an opportunity to tell us what they think. And I think when you look at the facts in an independent way, the answer becomes pretty obvious.
Rob, you say it's inside baseball, this frame a little bit. I mean, outside the budget, you couldn't survive in the past.
Well, I mean, I think, and you guys can chime in on this. First though, I'd say it's inside the court basketball, but I think it's one of those where there's a lot of discussion points, particularly to the speaker's point, because I think up until now, there's been a lot of speculation about what may or may not be in. I would ask any lawmaker, any of the 132 lawmakers in either chamber and either party, to take a pause, to take a timeout, if you will, to stick with bad puns, to take a timeout and say, before I make a commitment one way or the other on this plan, I just ask that they look at the facts. And I think, as we all felt, and as the county executive mentioned, this is a bipartisan effort here. There are Democrats and Republicans, city and county and state officials coming together on this, because what was universal for us was we realized that there's a price to know. Certainly, as I alluded to on this chart, at least $419 million hit to the state of Wisconsin versus the $80 million we're capped off in terms of our commitment to adding that. But as the mayor and the county executive talked about, there's a huge hit if the bucks leave to the city and county and to the region as a whole. And so there's all sorts of reasons why we're here together. I would just ask any of the lawmakers from any part of the state of Wisconsin, in either chamber, in either party, to at least just take a look at this, digest this, recognize that in the end there are some very, it's not as, I think it's a much more comprehensive debate if people realize not just what's in the package, but they realize what happens if we don't have a package. And I think that's probably the most important element. I would just ask any of the people who are elected to represent their constituents in the state Senate or the state Assembly to think long and hard about that before going out on the limb and saying something initially about where they stand. Take the time to look at it. I think a lot of this concern is just really about people being uncertain, and I think my belief is the more people look at the facts, not only of the plan itself, but the consequences of failing to act, I think the more we're going to see support build in both chambers.
Will you have a lion's share of funding coming from the center district? Are you concerned at all that revenue won't be available for another 13 years? Are you concerned about the interest that could add up? And is there a way to finance the deal so that those bonds don't necessarily have to be issued right away?
Well, I think in terms of the plan, we looked at a number of different options. Remember, I put a plan on the table. I tried to, part of this is listening to the interest of lawmakers here in this Capitol who didn't want the state to play quite as big a role and wanted to make sure the city and the county were a part of this. But, this center district, the Wisconsin Center District, was authorized 2 decades ago. So in terms of that time frame, you're looking about where we're at. Obviously, it's played a vital role in terms of tourism and attracting people, conventions and meetings to downtown Milwaukee and to the entire region. But I think in totality, part of the reason we looked at this was saying we felt strongly that when you think about Miller Park and you think about what it took to do the renovations at Lambeau Field, I think certainly the Senator and I and the lawmakers, the leadership that was here, was we didn't think there was the will nor the interest of taxpayers in the state to have a new tax like you did for each of those other 2 pieces of legislation. This was us working together, being creative, saying there's a role for the city, there's a role for the county, there's a role for the state. And when it came to the Wisconsin Center District, it just made a lot of sense to say, part of the reason for the Wisconsin Center District is not just to have a convention center, it's to draw people to that entire complex. And one of the nice things about this, too, is something, Chris, you're one up on me. I tried to do this years ago, but saying of bringing together, at least bringing the ability together to have a vote to bring together some of the different potentially competing interests in the downtown area to try and have greater efficiencies, to provide greater services when it came to entertainment and people within Milwaukee County and within the city of Milwaukee. Sure. I'll talk with anybody. As these lawmakers are probably tired of, and even more so my staff here, even when I'm traveling, I probably call 12 to 15 times a day to talk about where our status is on the budget. So whether it's in person or on a phone call, I'm willing to meet or talk with any lawmaker who's got a legitimate concern about this. I think it's one of those where it's a very compelling argument, and the more people know about it. Jessica, and then Mr. Speaker. Go ahead.
Before we go to that, one thing that I want to make sure we point out, probably like most of you, I actually watched the gubernatorial debates between Governor Walker and Tom Barrett. So I know that they don't agree on a lot of things. But I do know that in this example, they were both totally engaged. They were at the table. They negotiated in good faith. And I have no doubt that after both of these guys and all of us put so much effort into finding a deal that everybody could live with, I hope and I assume, because we've talked about it, that each of them will work their party, will work their interests, will work our members to get to an answer which is good for Wisconsin.
Jessica? Well, again, in this case, it's a simple math equation. If we do nothing, there'll be bigger cuts in the future. I mean, it's pretty simple. Having a $419 million hole, this is unlike other scenarios. Let's be clear. Let's be brutally honest here. It's not the owners. It's the NBA Board of Governors have made it explicitly clear that if an arena is not up and going, or at least en route, by 2017, the team's gone. And so I want to be clear. I've never met with the owners. I don't have anything against them. I just never met with them. And the reason why is, for me, this has always been about protecting the financial interest of the people of the state of Wisconsin. It's a nice benefit that it helps the Bucks, and it's a great catalytic development for jobs and development in the city and the county and the region. But my number one priority as your governor is to make sure I protect the financial interest. The fiduciary responsibility for me is to protect the financial interest of the people of the state. And if I do nothing, if we do nothing here, there's going to be a $419 million hole that the state's going to have to deal with in the future. That's going to only force more tough choices in the future. So for anybody who cares about the UW, or cares about schools, or cares about law enforcement, cares about support for our cities and our counties and our other local governments across the state, this is a good deal for them as well. Because if we protect those revenues, and we see a way to not only protect existing revenues, but we find a way that for every dollar we put in, we get $3 back in terms of new revenue and keep and protect existing revenue, that means we're going to have better budgets to deal with in the future. If we don't do anything, it means we're going to have bigger challenges in the future. So even if people say, you know what, I live clear on the other side of the state, and I could care less about the Milwaukee Bucks. I'm never going to see them. I don't like NBA basketball. If that's someone's opinion, they should still care about this. Because a $419 million hole is going to force tough choices for things they care about in future state budgets. I think that's the most compelling argument out there. Like I said, whether you live in Superior or Rice Lake or La Crosse or Kenosha or Rhinelander or Marinette or Sheboygan or right here in Madison, there's a pretty compelling case to be made if you want future budgets to be able to fund the things that are priorities. So those of us who live here in the state of Wisconsin, we doggone better will find a way to make sure that this revenue doesn't go away. And this, we think, is one of the best ways to bring the city, the county, the center district, and the state together to do so in a way that protects those interests for generations to come. Thanks very much. Appreciate it. We'll go ahead.
I just want to add one comment on that, just because I think this is something that is, the governor just made a really, really important point. You've spent a lot of time asking, and you should, hey, who's going to own picking up this big investment and this big cost? A question you should ask every legislator that you do about this is, who's going to own the big hole that's going to result if we don't have the Bucks? Because I've spent the last 4 years working very hard to restore social service. It's going to be a lot harder for me to restore social services if there's a big hole in the budget. Forget the Bucks for a second. put this decision just inside a box and you're just looking at the numbers part of this. Option A, we lose an enormous amount of revenue and there's a hole in the budget and it's going to hit all of us, and nobody wants to see that. Option B, we have a lot more revenue going forward, and that's the sort of revenue that, as the governor rightly pointed out, can go towards things like the UW system, which we all care about. I don't think there's any difference of opinion about wanting to get the best value, but I don't think there's anything wrong with you asking about the cost and expense. You should ask. I'm just saying you should also ask who's going to own. Who's going to be the legislator that say, I own the big revenue hole in the state that will be the result of not getting this deal done? Because, to the early question, are we willing to talk with legislators? I will talk to anybody in this state, and I will go through every program that gets funded by state revenue and tell them exactly, well, hey, forget basketball, right? I don't want a giant revenue hole. I want increased revenue going forward, and I will spend as much time as it takes, and I think we all will. And frankly, Speaker Voss and Majority Leader Fitzgerald have had a lot, and it's taken a lot of leadership to see not just the cost but the benefit, and to see that it's important to avoid the hole. It takes guts to get up and say this one matters. They've done that, and I just don't want us to lose that point. Thanks. I'm not in charge of naming rights, but honestly, if you wanted to call it the Don Walker Center, that wouldn't be a bad idea.
Yeah, and that, again, in terms of those details, we'll certainly follow. For us, this is about what the state and the local government's commitment is. It's capped overall at $250 million. It's capped at the state level at $80 million. It's a good deal going forward, and as we mentioned, it's a good deal for Milwaukee and the Bucks, but it's really important to the state as a whole. So thanks very much for coming.
Thank you all.